Dr. Carver grabbed Morgana's wrist so hard the chart flew from her hand and cracked against the floor. Every nurse on the floor froze. "You don't touch my patients." His face was 2 inches from hers. "You don't touch the charts. You don't touch anything in this ER that matters, because you don't matter." He released her wrist and shoved the fallen chart against her chest. "Your furniture. Expensive, useless furniture. And I'm this close to throwing you out with the trash." 12 interpreters were about to walk through that door and fail. And the one person who could save a man's life was standing there rubbing her wrist in silence. Invisible, dismissed, and completely underestimated. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Morgana's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The morning started the way every morning at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth started, with controlled chaos wearing the mask of routine. Morgana White arrived at 05:45, 15 minutes before her shift technically began, the way she always did. She signed in quietly, hung her jacket on the hook at the far end of the locker room. Not the closer hooks, never those. Those belonged to people who had earned the right to proximity. And she pulled on her scrubs with the same unhurried movements she used for everything. Slow, deliberate, invisible. She had a gift for that, invisibility. It wasn't something she had stumbled into. It was something she had cultivated over years, the way a gardener cultivates a particular plant, with patience, with intention, and with full understanding of exactly what she was growing and why. She picked up her first chart at 05:57, a post-surgical follow-up in Bay 4, vitals check, wound inspection, notation update, textbook, clean, the kind of task you handed to someone you didn't trust with anything real. Morgana did it without complaint. That was another thing about her. She never complained. Not when Dr. Carver reassigned her from a legitimate triage case to restocking the supply cabinet. Not when Nurse Hendricks, who had 4 years on her and a very clear opinion about newcomers, took credit for a medication catch that Morgana had made. Not when the overnight residents called her the ghost because she moved through the ER without anyone quite registering her presence. She heard all of it. She filed all of it, and she continued doing exactly what she came here to do. The question nobody in that building had thought to ask, because nobody had thought to look closely enough, was what exactly that was. By 07:30, the ER had already processed 11 patients. 2 trauma cases from a training accident on base, a cardiac episode in a retired chief petty officer, 3 fever cases from the barracks that turned out to be a shared food contamination issue, and a collection of the small, ordinary miseries that military life generated in bulk. Morgana moved through all of it like water around stone. Present, unobtrusive, efficient in a way that didn't call attention to itself. Dr. Carver arrived at 07:42. He was the kind of man who entered rooms the way weather systems did. You felt the pressure change before you saw him. Broad shoulders, close-cropped silver at his temples, a jaw set permanently at the angle of a man who considered patience a courtesy he extended selectively. He had 22 years at this facility. He had chief physician authority, and he used every inch of it. He spotted Morgana updating a chart at the nurse's station and stopped. "White." She looked up. "Dr. Carver, what are you working on?" "Post-op follow-up for the patient in Bay 4. Commander Reyes. I noticed a slight variation in his drain output from the morning notes." "I didn't ask for your interpretation. I asked what you were working on." He took the chart from her hands without asking, glanced at it for approximately 4 seconds, and handed it to Nurse Hendricks without looking at her. "Hendricks, finish this. White, I need the pharmacy requisition forms from last week, cross-referenced with the current inventory. All of it." It was the work of a file clerk. They both knew it. "Of course," Morgana said. Carver was already walking away. Then he stopped. He turned back around with the air of a man who had just remembered something he'd been meaning to say. "I pulled your file last night," he said. "It was casual, conversational. It wasn't. Interesting reading. You trained at Johns Hopkins. That's a real program. Good program. Yet somehow you end up here, in my ER, cross-referencing pharmacy forms." He tilted his head slightly. "You want to tell me what happened? Because the file gets thin real fast after your second year of residency." The room had gone very quiet. People were pretending to work at a volume that made clear they were doing anything but. Morgana held his gaze. "I took some time away. Personal circumstances. I'm fully current on all certifications and—" "I don't doubt your certifications," Carver said. "What I doubt is your purpose here. This is a high-pressure facility. I don't have the bandwidth to carry passengers. If you want to contribute something meaningful, show me. Otherwise—" He spread his hands slightly, a gesture that managed to contain both a threat and a dismissal in the same motion. "Otherwise, I start wondering if you belong here at all." He walked away. Nobody said anything. Morgana turned back to her screen. Her face was exactly as it had been before, composed, neutral, unreadable. Her hands were still on the keyboard, her breathing was even, but something behind her eyes had shifted. A very small recalibration. A quiet decision being made and remade, the way you test a knot before you trust your way to it. She pulled up the pharmacy requisition files and began. The call came in at 11:14. It came through the emergency channel, which meant it bypassed the normal triage flow and went directly to the charge station. And it came with a priority flag that Morgana had only seen used twice in her time at the facility. The voice on the other end was military, tight, clipped, the kind of voice that had learned to deliver critical information in minimum syllables. Inbound trauma, male subject, approximately mid-30s, GSW to the left shoulder, blunt trauma to the thorax, possible internal bleeding, ETA 6 minutes. Patient is a foreign national, no identification. He is conscious but— a pause, a very deliberate pause. He is not communicating in English. Charge nurse Petrova, who ran the desk with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen most things, sat up straight. "What language?" "Unknown," she repeated it. "Unknown?" The team on site attempted Spanish, French, and German. Negative response. He's conscious. He's trying to communicate something, and nobody can understand what he's saying. We're flagging for interpreter support. Petrova was already reaching for a second phone. "Copy that, we'll have someone ready." The ER shifted into a different gear. Not louder, exactly, but faster, more purposeful. The particular acceleration that happened when a real emergency, not a training accident, not a barracks fever, a real emergency, was 6 minutes out. Carver came back through the doors at a near run, pulling on gloves. "What do we have?" Petrova gave it to him straight. "Foreign national, trauma, unknown language." She was already scrolling through the facility's interpreter contact list. "I'm calling Martinez now. He covers Arabic, Farsi, and Pashto." "Call everyone on that list," Carver said. He pointed to the trauma bay. "Get it prepped. Where's Trauma 2's team?" "Coming." The next 4 minutes were organized bedlam. Morgana moved through it without being asked, pulling the trauma cart to the correct position, checking the airway equipment, confirming the blood type compatibility panel was stocked and accessible. Nobody told her to do any of it. She simply saw what needed doing and did it, efficiently and without fanfare. And when she was done, she stepped back to the edge of the room and became invisible again. Interpreter Martinez arrived at a run, slightly out of breath, his lanyard bouncing against his chest. He was good at his job. Morgana had seen him work twice before. He was fluent in 3 languages and conversational in 2 more. And he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had talked people through crises with nothing but words. The ambulance doors opened. The man on the gurney was not small. Even injured, even bleeding, Even with an oxygen mask being held against his face, there was something about him that occupied space in a way most people didn't. He was broad through the shoulders, or had been before the GSW had made a mess of the left one. His face was taut with pain, but his eyes were open, and they were alert. And they were doing something that Morgana noticed immediately and that nobody else in the room seemed to register. They were searching, scanning the faces around him with calculated precision, not the random panic of a man in pain, but the focused inventory of someone trying to identify who, in this room, he could trust. He was saying something. He had been saying something, apparently, since the moment he regained consciousness, and it was urgent, and it was repetitive, and nobody understood a word of it. Martinez stepped forward. He introduced himself in Arabic. The man's eyes moved to him. No recognition. Martinez tried Farsi, then Pashto. He tried Dari. He tried Urdu. The man on the gurney shook his head each time, an increasingly frustrated movement, and kept talking, kept repeating the same phrase or phrases, his voice dropping and then climbing with the effort of trying to be understood by people who weren't getting there. He's not responding to any of the standard Central Asian or Middle Eastern languages, Martinez said, turning to Carver. I'm not getting a match. Keep trying, Carver said. He was already focused on the wound, on the vitals, on the things he could control. Someone get the other interpreters in here. Over the next 40 minutes they came in sequence. An interpreter who covered Russian dialects and several Eastern European languages. A civilian contractor with background in sub-Saharan African languages. A Navy linguist flown in from a nearby base who had operational experience in Southeast Asia. A retired military intelligence officer who had worked in the Caucasus region for 6 years. Each of them tried. Each of them failed. The man on the gurney endured every attempt with the patience of someone who understood, perhaps better than any of them, the stakes of not being understood. He was stable, barely. Carver had gotten the shoulder wound controlled, had ruled out the worst-case scenarios on the internal bleeding front, but there was something the man was trying to communicate, something specific, something that kept pulling him back to consciousness every time the pain threatened to push him under, and nobody could reach it. 12 interpreters, 12, in a facility that served a global military operation and prided itself on linguistic coverage. 12, and counting. The room had developed a particular texture by the time the 12th interpreter, a woman from a contract language services firm, visibly embarrassed, stepped back and shook her head. It was the texture of collective defeat, of professional people confronting the outer limit of their preparation, of a problem that should have been solvable by the systems in place, and wasn't. Carver put both hands on the edge of the gurney and stared at the patient. The patient stared back at him, and the patient said something, the same phrase, or close to it, with a desperation that had now been compressed into something very quiet and very focused, which was somehow worse than the loud kind. "Someone give me a language family," Carver said. His voice was controlled, barely. "Something. What are we hearing? Is this Caucasian? Is this Turkic? What is it?" The linguist from the naval base, the one with Caucasus experience, was frowning deeply. "It has elements I'm almost recognizing. There's something in the phonology that reminds me of, but I can't place it exactly." "Can you work with almost?" "Not at the level this patient needs, sir. No." Carver straightened. He looked around the room with the expression of a man taking inventory of his options and finding them insufficient. His gaze moved across the assembled team. Residents, nurses, the interpreters clustered near the door. The 2 men in civilian clothes standing against the far wall, who had arrived with the patient and who had not identified themselves, but who had the kind of quiet, contained stillness that Morgana associated with people whose jobs didn't appear on standard paperwork. His gaze almost passed over Morgana, the way it always almost passed over Morgana. She was standing at the back of the room, near the equipment cart, exactly where she had positioned herself 40 minutes ago. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was neutral. Her eyes were on the patient, and the patient's eyes were on her. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. She had watched all 12 interpreters try and fail, and she had stood there and watched and done nothing. And the patient, who had been scanning faces since the moment he arrived, searching, calculating, had at some point in the last several minutes fixed his gaze on her and kept it there. Morgana felt it the way you feel a spotlight before it's fully aimed at you. A warmth, a shift in the air. She didn't look away from the patient. The patient said the phrase again, quieter this time, not to the room, to her. One of the two men from the far wall, the taller one, the one whose stillness had a particular quality to it, the quality of someone who had learned to be completely motionless in situations where motion meant death, took 2 steps forward. His eyes moved from the patient to Morgana with the precision of a targeting system. "You heard something," he said. It wasn't a question. Morgana turned to look at him. He was younger than she'd first estimated, mid-30s, the kind of face that had been weathered past its years by things that didn't show up on a service record. His eyes were gray-green, and they were doing to her exactly what the patient had been doing to the room, taking inventory, looking for the useful truth inside the available information. "I'm sorry," she said. "You reacted. Just now, when he spoke." He took another step toward her, not threatening, precise. "What did you hear?" Carver's head came up. "Who are you?" The man didn't look at him. He kept looking at Morgana. "Chief Warrant Officer Dex Harlan. I came in with the patient." Now he looked at Carver, briefly. "He's one of ours, functionally speaking. I need to know what he's trying to tell us." "Then you're welcome to join the 12 people who already tried," Carver started. "She heard something," Harlan said again. He looked back at Morgana. "Didn't you?" It wasn't quite a question. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was a man who had spent his career reading people in rooms where getting the read wrong had serious consequences, and he was not unsure of what he had seen. Morgana held his gaze for 2 seconds. 3. The kind of silence that has weight to it. Then she looked at the patient. The patient's breathing had become shallower in the last several minutes. Not dangerously, not yet, but the direction was wrong, and everyone in the room with enough clinical training to see it knew it. She stepped forward, not a dramatic step, not the step of someone claiming a stage, a step the way you take a step when you've been standing still long enough, and there's something on the other side of the room that requires your presence. And there's no longer any sensible reason to delay. She moved to the side of the gurney. She looked down at the patient. He looked up at her. Up close, she could see the precise quality of his focus. He wasn't delirious, wasn't fading. He was present and contained, and desperate in the specific way that competent people become desperate when their competence can't solve the problem in front of them. She spoke to him. The language that came out of her mouth was not Arabic. It was not Russian. It was not Pashto or Dari or any of the 12 languages that 12 interpreters had tried. It was something that the linguist with Caucasus experience made a small, involuntary sound at, something between recognition and disbelief. Because he had been almost right, he had been hearing the echo of the right answer without being able to reach it. It was a Circassian dialect, specifically Kabardian, a language spoken by somewhere in the range of 500,000 people, primarily in a specific region of the Russian Caucasus and in diaspora communities scattered across Turkey, Jordan, and Syria, a language that had no standardized writing system until the 20th century, a language that most professional linguists had encountered only in academic papers, if at all. Morgana spoke it with the ease of someone speaking their mother tongue. The patient's whole body changed. It was visible to everyone in the room. The particular tension of a person who has been trying to be understood and failing, a tension that is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with physical injury, released from him like a breath he had been holding since he regained consciousness. His eyes filled. He blinked it back. He spoke, and Morgana listened. She asked 2 questions in rapid succession. He answered both. She asked a third. His answer to the third was longer, and as it continued, her hand moved to the chart at the end of the gurney without her looking at it, and she picked up the pen clipped to the side, and she wrote 3 words. She held the chart out to Carver. He took it. He looked at what she had written. His face changed in a way that Morgana had not seen it change in 3 weeks. Not anger, not dismissal, not the carefully maintained authority of a man who had earned his position and intended to keep it. Something more primary than any of those things. The 3 words were, left side, shrapnel, embedded. Carver looked up from the chart. He looked at Morgana. He looked at the patient. He grabbed the portable imaging unit from the wall and said, in the voice of a man who has just been handed the one piece of information that makes all the other pieces make sense, I need imaging, left lateral thorax, right now. He got it 30 seconds later. The fragment was there, small, angled, positions in exactly the way that would have made it invisible on the initial scan they'd run, but visible now with the specific targeting information the patient had been trying to give them for the last 40 minutes. Positioned close enough to the pericardium, that movement, the wrong movement, the movement that would have happened within the next hour as they worked on the shoulder wound without knowing it was there, would have been catastrophic. The room was very quiet. Carver set the imaging tablet down. He turned and looked at Morgana White, standing at the edge of the gurney with the calm, composed, unreadable face that he had spent 3 weeks dismissing, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then carefully, as if recalibrating something fundamental about the information he had available, "Where did you learn Kabardian?" Morgana met his gaze. "I picked it up," she said, and Harlan, standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his gray-green eyes fixed on her with an expression that had moved well past professional interest into something significantly more intent, said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "No one just picks up Kabardian." The surgery took 4 hours. Morgana spent them doing exactly what she had been assigned to do. Vitals monitoring, chart updates, the ordinary administrative work of a facility that never truly stopped moving. She did it with the same efficiency and the same invisibility as always, moving through the ER like water around stone. But something had changed. It was subtle. The way things that matter are often subtle. People who had been looking through her for 3 weeks were now, occasionally, looking at her. Not speaking to her, not acknowledging what had happened in the trauma bay in any direct way, but registering her, the way you register the presence of something you hadn't correctly identified before. Hendricks walked past her at the nurse's station and paused. "That was," she started. "The patient is stable," Morgana said. "That's what matters." Hendricks opened her mouth, closed it, walked away. Harlan found her in the break room at 1700. She was eating a sandwich she had made at home, sitting at the corner table, her back to the wall, always her back to the wall, reading something on her phone that she put face down on the table when he sat across from her without asking. He put a cup of coffee down, not for her, for himself. He wrapped both hands around it and looked at her. 8 languages, he said. She picked up her sandwich. The patient needed one. "I counted," Harlan said, "while you were talking to him. You shifted registers 3 times within Kabardian alone. You adjusted your dialect based on his responses. That's not someone who picks something up." He set down the coffee. "That's someone who was trained." Morgana chewed, swallowed. "I spent some time abroad." "Where?" "Several places. Kabardino-Balkaria is not a tourist destination." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Harlan studied her. The particular stillness was back, that quality of someone capable of waiting for as long as waiting required. "Your file says you're from Portland, that you went to Hopkins, that you spent 2 years in residency and then took personal leave." "That's what my file says." It also says you have no overseas service history, no military affiliation, no government contractor employment. He paused, which makes someone like you, with a skill like that, something of a, he tilted his head slightly, puzzle. Most people are puzzles, Morgana said, if you look closely enough. I look closely at everything. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't not smiling. He was simply watching her with those gray-green eyes that had the quality of very old, very deep water, still on the surface, complex underneath. I'm good at it. It's sort of the thing I do. Morgana looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her phone, turned it face up, and checked the time. I have a shift end in 20 minutes, she said, and a post-op check on the patient in Bay 7. She stood up. She picked up her sandwich. The man you brought in, she said, he told me something else while I was talking to him. She didn't look at Harlan when she said it. She looked at the middle distance, in the particular way of someone choosing their words. He said he wasn't alone. Whoever put that fragment in him, they were looking for something, and they didn't find it. She looked at Harlan now. He was worried that they were still looking. The break room was very quiet. Harlan's hands had gone still around the coffee cup. He said that, Harlan said. In Kabardian, yes. And you understood. Obviously. A beat. Why didn't you tell Carver? Morgana looked at him with those calm, unreadable eyes. I did tell someone, she said, and she walked out of the break room and down the hallway and back to work. And Harlan sat with his coffee growing cold in his hands, and the expression of a man who has just picked up a thread and found, when he pulled it, that it was attached to something significantly larger than the surface had suggested. Outside in the parking structure, a car that had been parked in the same spot for 6 hours and 40 minutes started its engine. The driver made a phone call, said 6 words, ended the call, and drove away. The day shift ended at 1800. Morgana signed out. She hung her badge on the hook. She pulled on her jacket. She took the long way to the parking lot. Through the east corridor, past the administrative offices, down the stairwell rather than the elevator. She stopped at the bottom of the stairwell. She listened. Then she pushed through the door into the cold evening air, walked to her car, and drove away. She did not take the most direct route home. She never did. The surgery was still running when Harlan made his first call. He stepped into the east stairwell and dialed a number he had memorized years ago and never written down anywhere. It rang twice. It's Harlan. He kept his voice low, steady, controlled. The asset is stable. Surgery is ongoing, but we have a complication. He paused. Someone in this facility speaks Kabardian. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. In Harlan's experience, 3 seconds of silence from this particular contact meant the information had landed harder than expected. How fluent, native level, dialect accurate. She adjusted register mid-conversation based on his regional inflections. He stared at the wall in front of him. She heard things he told her that he didn't tell me. Another pause, shorter. She. Nurse, rookie designation. File reads clean. Hopkins graduate, residency gap, no overseas. But the file is wrong. He said it with the flat certainty of a man stating observable fact. The file is definitely wrong. Send me what you have. That's the problem. He turned and leaned back against the wall. I don't have anything yet. She gave me nothing, and she gave it to me in a way that felt deliberate. The contact's voice dropped by about 2 degrees. Harlan. Yeah. Be careful. He ended the call and stood in the stairwell for a moment longer, thinking in the particular way he thought when a situation had revealed a shape he hadn't anticipated, without letting the recalculation show on his face. Then he went back upstairs. The patient's name, as best they could establish from the documents recovered from the vehicle he'd been transported in, was listed as Aslan Mamit. Whether that was his real name was a question nobody at the facility was in a position to answer. And the 2 men who had arrived with him, Harlan and his partner Reese, a compact, watchful man who had said approximately 14 words since their arrival, were not volunteering additional information. Mamit had come through surgery. Carver had gone in with the specific knowledge Morgana had extracted, left lateral thorax, shrapnel, embedded, and found the fragment in exactly the position she had indicated, angled 17 degrees toward the pericardium, close enough that another 2 hours of standard treatment without knowing it was there would have produced an outcome nobody wanted to write the report on. He removed it cleanly. He was a good surgeon. Whatever else he was, and Morgana had spent 3 weeks cataloging the whatever else. When a procedure mattered, he did not let anything else matter more. When he came out of the OR, he stood in the scrub room for longer than the hand washing required. Then he went to find Morgana. She was at the nurse's station, writing up the shift transition notes. She didn't look up when he stopped across from her. "White. Dr. Carver. He's stable." He said it like a man delivering a verdict in a case he hadn't expected to win. "The fragment was exactly where you said it was." "Good," she kept writing. Carver put both hands flat on the counter. Not aggressively, not the way he'd grabbed her wrist that morning, which felt now like it had happened in a different era, though it had been less than 8 hours ago. Just a man putting his hands down because he needed something solid under them. "I owe you an apology," he said. Morgana's pen slowed for exactly 1 stroke, then resumed. "The patient needed qualified help. He got it. That's what matters." "That's not—" He stopped himself, started again, lower. "I was wrong about you. I've been wrong about you for 3 weeks, and I said things this morning that were out of line, professionally and personally." Morgana finished the line she was writing. She set the pen down parallel to the notepad, looked up at him. "Apology noted," she said, "not accepted." Not rejected, noted, filed, the way she filed everything. Carver held her gaze, then nodded once with the specific quality of a man who understood he was being given exactly as much as he had earned, and not a fraction more. He turned and walked away. Hendricks, who had been pretending to restock a supply tray 6 feet away for the entire exchange, waited until the door swung shut behind him. "Noted," she said, almost under her breath, with something that was almost admiration. "You said noted to Carver." Morgana picked up her pen again. "Do you know nobody has ever made that man apologize for anything in 22 years? I have been here 4 of them, and I have never once—" "He didn't apologize because I made him," Morgana said. She turned the page without looking up. "He apologized because a patient almost died and didn't. That changes how people calculate things." She glanced at Hendricks briefly. "Most people." Hendricks opened her mouth, closed it, then said with the air of someone committing to a position after considerable internal debate, "I should have said something this morning. When he grabbed you, I should have said something." Morgana considered this for 1 full second. "Yes," she said simply, "you should have." And she went back to writing. Reese found her first. Not Harlan. Reese. She was walking the east corridor toward the locker room when he appeared at the junction, not approaching so much as simply being there. The way these men had a talent for being present in places without having obviously traveled to them. "He asked about you," Reese said without preamble. Morgana stopped. "Who did?" "Mamit. He's out of anesthesia. Asking for the woman who spoke to him, specifically." A fractional pause. "The recovery ward put in a translation request. It went nowhere for the same reasons it went nowhere this afternoon. He should be resting. He's aware. He's asking anyway." Reese studied her with the same calibrated attention as Harlan, but with less of Harlan's careful neutrality. Something more direct about Reese. More frontal. "You coming?" She didn't move immediately. 4 seconds of visible stillness. Reese noticed it and said nothing. "Is Harlan there?" she asked. "Not yet." She started walking. Mammoth was awake. He looked considerably worse than before surgery, which was the honest reality of having your thoracic cavity opened regardless of necessity. But his eyes were the same, present, alert, calculating. They found Morgana the moment she came through the door. He spoke. She answered. 8 seconds, maybe 10. Then she turned to Reese. "He says thank you," she said. Reese waited. He had the patience of a man who understood that people who said thank you first were usually building towards something else. "He also says he needs you to know that the men who did this to him have been in this city for 4 days. She kept her voice clinically precise. "He says they weren't following him. They were following what he was carrying." A pause. "He says he no longer has it." Reese had gone completely still. "Where is it?" Morgana spoke to Mamet. Mamet answered. "He says that's not information he's giving to anyone he can't identify." She tilted her head slightly toward Reese. "He can't identify you." The beat that followed was long and loaded. Reese's jaw shifted, a small, controlled movement that spoke to a larger reaction being physically managed beneath the surface. "Harlan?" he said. "Apparently. He'll talk to Harlan. That's what he says." Reese made a call, said 2 sentences, ended it. 15 minutes. Morgana nodded. She turned back to Mamit and said something short in Kabardian. His expression shifted, not quite surprise, more like a recalibration. The expression of a person who has just been shown that someone understands more than they expected. He studied her face for a moment and then said something back, very quietly, that she did not translate out loud. She simply gave one small nod. Reese watched all of it and said nothing, but his eyes were doing the same work Harlan's did, cataloging, connecting, filing. Morgana could feel it. She had spent years learning to feel exactly that kind of attention from across a room, the way certain animals learn to feel a change in barometric pressure before the storm arrives. Harlan came through the door in 11 minutes, not 15. His jacket was still on, which meant he had come from outside. He looked at Morgana first, not Mamet, and the look lasted long enough to communicate that the break room conversation was unfinished business. Then he looked at Mamet and moved to the bedside, and Morgana translated without being asked, converting Harlan's careful, probing questions into Kabardian, and then turning Mamet's answers back into English with the clean efficiency of a professional interpreter. No editorializing, no delay. For 12 minutes, it was seamless. Then Mamit said something Morgana did not immediately translate. Harlan looked at her. What did he say? She was quiet for a moment, still looking at Mamit. Something was happening between them. Not a conversation exactly, more like a negotiation conducted entirely in the space between 2 pairs of eyes. He wants to know, she said carefully, who you are to her. Harlan's expression didn't change. To her. To me, Morgana said. The recovery room held very still. He doesn't know you, Harlan said. No, Morgana agreed, but he knows what I am. And then she stopped. And what she had just said sat in the air of that room like a stone dropped into still water. And the ripples moved outward, and Harlan watched them move, and Reese watched them move, and Mamet watched all 3 of them with the expression of a man who has just confirmed a suspicion and is now deciding what to do with the confirmation. What you are, Harlan repeated. His voice was exactly as it had been, controlled, precise. What are you, Morgana? She looked at him without blinking. A nurse, she said, currently on the tail end of a double shift. If you need continued interpretation, I'm available tomorrow morning. She walked out. Reese waited until the door had fully closed. Then he turned to Harlan with the air of someone who had been holding something back for some time. She knew him. She'd never met him. She knew what he was. He knew what she was. He crossed his arms. That's not 2 strangers. That's 2 people who operate in the same world recognizing each other. Harlan didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at the door. Pull everything, he said finally. Not just the official file. Pull the gap, The 2 years. Pull every thread that leads nowhere and follow it anyway. That's going to take, I know how long it takes. He looked at Mamet. And ask him what he knows about her, in English, so I don't need her to translate it back to me. Reese leaned down over the bedside, asked, in clean, unembellished English, "Who is she?" Mamet looked at him, then at the door she had walked through, then back at Reese with the expression of a man measuring exactly how much to release and in which direction. He said one word, in English, "Shepherd." The parking structure was 2 levels and almost empty at this hour. Morgana reached her car and stood next to it without unlocking it for a full 2 minutes. She was running a calculation, had been running it since Mamet's eyes found her in the trauma bay, and she understood, before he spoke a single syllable, before 12 interpreters had failed, exactly what language she was hearing. She had run it through the surgery, through Carver's apology, through Harlan in the break room, through the recovery room and Mamet's careful, deliberate slip. The calculation kept returning the same result. She unlocked the car, got in, sat. Her phone had 3 missed calls from a number she recognized but hadn't saved. She had received calls from it 7 times in the last 2 years. Each one had preceded a significant change in her circumstances. She called back. It rang once. "He's alive," said the voice on the other end. Male, older, the kind of voice that had given orders long enough that even casual conversation came out sounding like a directive. "I wasn't certain he would be. He's stable. Surgery went well. The fragment? Removed." A breath, the specific quality of relief being carefully managed. "And the carrying, did he tell you where?" "No." She let that sit. There were people in the room. Harlan, not a question. "Yes." "How much does he know?" Morgana looked at the concrete wall in front of her. "He knows I speak Kabardian. He knows my file has gaps. He's smart enough to connect those 2 facts and pull on the thread." She paused. "He'll find something. Not the real thing, but something." "How long do we have?" "Long enough, maybe." "Morgana," the voice shifted, not softer. This was not a soft voice, but with a different frequency in it. The frequency of concern being imperfectly concealed by a man who was not accustomed to concern. "Are you blown?" She thought about Mamet's face when she had spoken to him, the recognition that had moved through it. 2 people in the same world seeing each other. "Not yet," she said. "If Harlan is running a background pull, the cover holds. You built it well. Covers don't hold against someone who knows to look for the gaps specifically." "Then I'll be careful about the gaps." She reached forward and started the car. "I need to know something." Mamet said he was followed for the carrying, not for himself, which means whoever hit him knew what he was transporting. She paused. "That is a short list of people who knew, and Mamet trusted it with him, which means he trusted the source." She let the silence do the work for a moment, which means the leak is close. How close? The voice on the other end held its silence for a long time, a different quality than Harlan's pauses. Older, heavier, the weight of someone sitting with information they had been hoping wouldn't become relevant. "Come in," he said finally. "Not the primary location. You know the secondary." "When?" "Tomorrow, 1800. She backed out of the space and moved toward the exit ramp. At the bottom, before the gate, she stopped at a sign that technically didn't require a full stop. She stopped anyway. Complete. Deliberate. "One more thing," she said. Mamik gave Harlan's partner a word. One word, in English. A pause. "What word?" "Shepherd." The silence this time had an entirely different texture. The texture of something very old and very carefully buried being suddenly and unexpectedly exposed. "He shouldn't know that name," the voice said, very quietly. "No," Morgana agreed. "He shouldn't." She drove through the gate and into the cold night without taking the most direct route to anywhere at all. Back in the recovery room, Harlan sat in the chair beside Mamet's bed, with his phone in his hand and a search function open on a network that wasn't connected to any civilian system. He typed the word, watched it return 0 results through official channels. In his experience, 0 results in a system built to know everything was not a negative. It was an answer. It meant someone had worked very deliberately to make sure this particular network couldn't find this particular word. It meant classification above his current access level. It meant a wall, carefully constructed by someone with the authority and the skill to build walls that held. Mamet's eyes opened, fully alert, as if he had been listening from inside the half-sleep the whole time. "You know it," Mamet said, in English, effortful but clear. The word. Harlan looked at him. "You speak English?" "A little." Mamet held his gaze steadily. "Enough to say this. Be careful with her. She is not what she appears here, but she is not your enemy." He closed his eyes again, his voice dropping to something barely above a breath. "That is the most important thing. She is not your enemy." Harlan was quiet for a long moment. "Then what is she?" Mamet didn't answer. He had gone under again into the deep pull of sedation, and the recovery room held only the soft rhythm of monitors and the echo of a word that had just opened a door Harlan hadn't known existed. Shepherd. He sat with it. He turned it in his mind the way you turn an object in your hand when you are trying to understand its function from its shape. Then he put his phone away, stood up, and walked to the window that looked out over the facility's east lot. A single car was leaving the parking structure. He couldn't make out the driver. He watched the taillights move through the gate, pause at the bottom of the exit ramp for 1 beat longer than necessary, and then pull out onto the service road heading east. Not the most direct route to anywhere obvious. He stood at the window until the taillights disappeared. Then he turned away and went to work. Morgana did not sleep that night. She sat at the small table in her apartment with a cup of tea she had made and forgotten about, and she thought about the word Mamet had given Harlan's partner. 1 word, in English, chosen deliberately, released deliberately, in a room where Morgana was no longer present to hear it, which meant Mamet had intended her not to hear it, which meant the word was a message aimed specifically at Harlan, not at her, which meant Mamet was running his own calculation, his own separate, parallel calculation. And somewhere in that calculation, Harlan was a variable that needed to be introduced to something Mamet couldn't say out loud in Kabardian, with Morgana standing 3 feet away. She turned that over for a long time. The tea went cold. She didn't drink it. At 2 in the morning, she opened her laptop and accessed a server through a pathway that had nothing to do with her apartment's registered internet connection. She pulled up a file. Not her official file, that one she knew by heart. Every constructed detail, every carefully placed gap. This was a different file. A working file. A file she updated periodically and kept in a location that did not exist on any network that any standard search would reach. She read through it with the detached focus of an analyst reviewing someone else's work. Then she closed the laptop, lay down on her bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until the alarm went off at 5:15. She arrived at the facility at 5:45, 15 minutes early, the way she always did. The morning shift had the particular texture of a unit that had processed something significant the day before and was still moving through its aftermath. People who had been in the trauma bay were quieter than usual. Not subdued. This was a military medical facility. Subdued was not a sustainable operational state, but calibrated differently. Adjusted. The way a group of people adjusts after an event that has redistributed their understanding of who among them is capable of what. Morgana signed in, hung her jacket, pulled on her scrubs. She picked up her first chart at 5:58. Bay 2, a routine post-operative follow-up. She went to work. Carver arrived at 7:31. He moved through the ER with the same authority as always. The pressure system quality, the weather front entrance. but something in it had shifted by approximately 3 degrees. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. Morgana noticed. He was looking at things more carefully than he had before. Not just at patients and charts and the operational status of his floor. At people. At her. She noted it, filed it, kept working. He stopped at the nurse's station at 8:15 and picked up the chart she was working on without taking it from her hands this time, just picking up the adjacent copy. "Mamid is asking for you again," he said. No preamble, no editorializing. "I'll go when I finish the post-op notes on Bay 2. He's been asking since 6 this morning." Carver set the chart down. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had reorganized his assessment of a situation and was now working from the new configuration. "What language is it again? The one you spoke to him?" "Kabardian. I've been practicing medicine for 26 years, he said. "I have never in my professional life encountered a situation that required Kabardian. Most situations don't." She turned a page. "Yesterday's did." Carver was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn it?" Morgana looked up at him. She held his gaze with the same composure she brought to everything. "I spent time in the region. I'm good with languages. It accumulated." "How many do you speak?" She returned to the chart. "Enough," she said. Carver stood there for another few seconds in the specific way of a man who has more questions than he has calculated the right moment to ask. Then he moved on, the way he always moved on, toward the next thing requiring his authority. Morgana finished the post-op notes. Then she went to see Mamet. He was more alert than the previous evening, which was both a good sign medically and a complicating sign in every other sense. He was sitting up against the raised back of the recovery bed, and the IV lines running into his left arm had been reduced from 3 to 2, and the monitors beside him were reading numbers that Morgana scanned automatically as she came through the door, because reading numbers automatically was what she did. He watched her cross the room. She sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair Harlan had occupied the previous night, though she didn't know that, and she looked at him directly. "You gave them the word," she said, in Kabardian. Quiet, level. Mamet's expression didn't change. "I gave him one word. Yes." "Why?" "Because he needed to know that you are not what your file says, and because I could not tell him more without telling him too much." He adjusted his position slightly and winced with the adjustment. "And because you were not in the room, which meant it was safe to tell him the minimum." "The minimum was not minimum," she said. "That word opens things. It was meant to." He looked at her steadily. "Morgana, the men who followed me, they are not stopping. They did not find what they were looking for. They know I am here. They know I am alive. And they know," he paused, took a breath that cost him something. "They know I would not have transported what I was transporting without telling someone where it was. They will come here." The recovery room was quiet except for the monitors. "When?" she said. "I don't know exactly, but soon." He held her gaze. "You cannot continue alone. You cannot maintain the cover and manage this simultaneously. You need—" "I don't need Harlan." "I didn't say Harlan." She looked at him. "I said you cannot do this alone," he repeated. "I said nothing about who. That is your decision." He leaned back against the pillow with the careful movement of a man conserving energy. "But make it quickly, because the people who put that fragment in me do not wait." Morgana sat with that for a moment. Then she stood. She straightened her badge on her chest, the small automatic gesture of someone reestablishing their external identity, and she looked down at him. "Rest," she said. "You say that as if it's simple. It is simple. You're the one making it complicated." She moved toward the door and then stopped. Without turning around, she said, "The word you gave him. He looked it up last night. He found nothing through official channels." "I know," Mamet said. "That will make him more curious, not less." "I know that too." A pause. "That was also intentional." She pushed through the door. Harlan was in the hallway, not waiting, standing, which was different. Standing the way a person stands when they have arrived at a location with a specific purpose and are simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, and he held one out to her without speaking. She looked at the cup. She took it. They walked. Not toward anything in particular. Down the east corridor, which was the quietest corridor at this hour, which Morgana had learned in her first week here, and which Harlan had apparently identified independently sometime in the last 24 hours. I pulled your background, he said. No preamble, no softening. I assumed you would. Your cover is good. He sipped from his cup. Whoever built it was thorough. Johns Hopkins records are solid. The residency documentation is consistent. The personal leave narrative is internally coherent. He paused. But there are 3 places where the chronology requires the same 6-week period to be in 2 different locations. It's subtle. Most people wouldn't catch it. Morgana walked. Didn't answer. You're not most people, he said. So I'm guessing you know exactly where those 3 places are, and that they were left there deliberately, as a kind of, he considered his word, canary, to tell you if someone had looked closely enough. She looked at him sideways. What do you want, Harlan? I want to know who you work for. I work for this facility. Before this facility. The file says personal leave. The file, he said, with a patience that had iron underneath it, is a construction, a good one. But you just told me you know where the canaries are, which means you built the file, or you supervised its construction, which means the personal leave is... He stopped walking. She stopped 2 steps later and turned back to face him. Morgana, a man almost died yesterday, in your ER, being followed by people who are not going to stop, and you are standing in this hallway with a story that doesn't hold its own weight under examination. So I'm asking you directly, who do you work for? She looked at him for a long time. The coffee cup was warm in her hand. The corridor was empty in both directions. You found the canaries, she said finally. That means you're cleared for the kind of search that finds them, which means your access level is not what a standard chief warrant officer carries. She tilted her head slightly. So maybe you tell me first. Something moved in Harlan's expression, very small. The recalibration of a man who has been deploying a strategy and has just been shown that the other player identified the strategy before he finished deploying it. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face. I'm attached to a task force, he said. Joint. The designation is above standard clearance. Mammoth was a source, not mine specifically, but sourced through a network I operate adjacent to. He paused. The asset he was transporting is something we have been looking for 8 months. It went dark 6 months ago. Yesterday was the first confirmed sighting. What is it? Not yet, he said. Your turn. Morgana considered. She looked down at the coffee cup. Then she looked back up at him. I consult, she said, for an organization that doesn't have a public-facing name. I've been doing it for 6 years. This placement was not random. I was put here because something was going to move through this region, and someone needed to be in place when it did. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. Someone who could communicate when standard communication failed. Someone nobody would look at twice. Harlan was very still. How long have you known about Mehmet specifically? I didn't know about Mehmet. I knew something was coming. I didn't know what shape it would take. Who sent you? She met his gaze steadily. The same kind of organization yours is. The kind that doesn't have a name you can look up. The corridor held the particular silence of 2 people who have each revealed a calculated amount and are now measuring whether the exchange was equal. Then Harlan said, Shepard. It came out not as a question, not as a statement, as a test, a controlled detonation, small, aimed carefully to see what the blast would reveal about the structure underneath. Morgana did not move, did not blink, did not change expression by any measurable degree. Where did you hear that word? She said. Mamit gave it to Reese. I know he did. Her voice was exactly level. I told you last night I wanted to see what you would do with it. Harlan absorbed that. You knew he was going to give it. I suspected. He's careful, and he's strategic, and he needed you pointed in a direction without telling you the full map. She paused. It's what I would have done. What does it mean? Another pause, longer than the others. The kind of pause that has weight to it, not hesitation, but the deliberate management of a decision being made in real time. It's a designation, she said. It refers to a specific operational profile, someone who moves through environments undetected, who communicates across barriers, who is placed before an event rather than deployed in response to one. She looked at him. You found 0 results in your search. 0. Because the people who use that designation don't file it anywhere that your system can reach, or mine. She straightened slightly, which means Mehmet knows it from a source that operates outside both our networks. And that, she stopped. That's a problem, Harlan said quietly. That's a significant problem, she confirmed. They stood in the corridor with that problem between them, solid and immediate and requiring attention neither of them had fully allocated yet. Harlan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something moved across his face. The controlled version of an urgent response. The version that had been trained into efficiency through years of receiving news that required immediate action without the luxury of visible reaction. Reese, he said. He read the message, read it again, looked up. There were 2 men in the visitor's lot this morning. They've been there since before 7. Neither of them is on the access log. Neither of them matches anyone with current legitimate business at this facility. Morgana felt something shift in her chest. Mehmet's voice in the recovery room. They will come here. How long since Reese flagged it? She said. 4 minutes. And they're still there? One is. The second moved. He was already typing back. Reese is tracking him inside the building. Inside, she said it flat. A statement, not a question, because the questions were already being answered by other parts of her brain that had moved past the need to frame things as questions. East entrance, 6 minutes ago. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked at her. He's heading toward the recovery ward. Morgana was already moving, not running, not yet. Moving at the specific pace that is as fast as possible without being the kind of movement that registers as alarming to the people you're moving through. She had learned that pace in a different life, in a different corridor, under different circumstances, and her body remembered it with the muscle memory of something deeply practiced. Harlan matched her stride without being asked. Reese is on him, Harlan said low, as they turned the corner into the main artery of the facility. But Reese is one person, and if there are more we don't know about, how many staff on the recovery ward right now? 2 nurses, a resident. The attending doesn't come on until 9. And Mehmet's security? There isn't any official security. He's listed under an assumed admission name. The theory was that the anonymity was protection enough. The theory, Morgana said, was wrong. They were 40 feet from the recovery ward entrance when the door opened from the inside. A man came out. He wasn't in scrubs. He wasn't in a uniform of any kind. He was wearing civilian clothes that were correct for a visitor and incorrect in about 6 specific ways that Morgana cataloged in under 2 seconds. The shoes, the way the jacket sat on his frame, the direction of his eyes when he came through the door, which was not the direction of someone who had just visited a patient. It was the direction of someone who had completed a task and was now calculating the fastest exit. He saw Morgana and Harlan at the same moment they saw him. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Then the man turned and went back through the door fast, and Harlan was running before the door finished swinging, and Morgana was 3 steps behind him, already reaching for her phone. Inside the recovery ward, one of the nurses was standing against the wall with both hands up, a reflexive defensive posture, her face white with a fear that was very fresh and very real. The resident was on the floor, not injured, she registered immediately, crouched behind the medication cart, which was the right call, and Mamet's bed was surrounded by the specific chaos of monitoring equipment that had been disconnected in a hurry. Mamet was still in the bed. He was conscious. He was breathing. His eyes found Morgana across the room with the same immediate, practiced focus they had found her with in the trauma bay the previous day. The man in civilian clothes had made it to the window and found it sealed. These were sealed windows. This was a secure facility. He had not accounted for that, and he turned at bay with the calculation of someone running rapidly through diminishing options. Harlan had his credentials out. Federal officer, hands. The man looked at Harlan, at the credentials, at Morgana, and then he did something that neither of them expected. He relaxed. Not the relaxation of someone surrendering, the relaxation of someone who has decided that a situation has reached its conclusion and that further resistance has no return on investment. He put his hands up, slowly, deliberately, and he said in accented English, Russian accented, Morgana noted, with a specific regional inflection that she placed in under 3 seconds. I was not going to hurt him. Put your hands on the wall, Harlan said. I was delivering a message, the man said. He was looking at Morgana now, not Harlan. Specific at Morgana. For you, he said, the message is for Shepard. The recovery room went completely silent. Even the monitors seemed to pause. Harlan held position, hands visible, controlled, the training overriding the shock. But Morgana could see in his peripheral expression, the slight tightening at the corner of his eye, that the word had landed like it was intended to land. Who sent you? Morgana said. Someone who needs you to know that the asset Mamet was carrying is already in motion. It left this city 14 hours ago. The man's voice was steady, almost mechanical. The voice of someone reciting something memorized. And the person who authorized the leak, the person who told them what Mamet was carrying and where he was going, is someone you have already met. The silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then Harlan said, very quietly, name. The man looked at Morgana, still at Morgana, not at Harlan. The message is for Shepard, he said again, not for you. Harlan's jaw tightened. Morgana stepped forward, came close enough that she could keep her voice low, below the threshold of the nurse and the resident, still pressed against the far wall. Name, she said. The man looked at her for a moment with the assessment of someone confirming an identity they had been given a description of and are now verifying in person. Then he said a name, and Morgana's face, for the first time in 24 hours, for the first time perhaps in much longer than that, changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who hadn't been watching her with the specific, practiced attention of someone whose job required reading people. But to Harlan, who had been watching her with exactly that attention since the moment she stepped forward in the trauma bay and spoke a language 12 professionals couldn't reach, to Harlan, it was unmistakable. The name meant something to her, something significant, something that had moved past the outer defenses and landed somewhere internal that she didn't usually allow access to. She took one step back, controlled it immediately, composed herself in the span of a single breath, with the efficiency of someone who had composed themselves under pressure more times than most people had hot meals. Secure him, she said to Harlan. Level, clean. I need 10 minutes. She walked to the far corner of the recovery room where the sealed window looked out onto the east lot. She put her back to the room. She looked through the glass. In the lot below, a single car sat in the space that had been occupied since before 7 that morning. Even from this height, she could make out the shape of someone in the driver's seat, waiting. Her phone was in her hand. The number she had called the previous night was already on the screen. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a real hesitation, not a tactical one, and then she dialed. It rang 3 times. He always picked up within 2. The 3rd ring meant something. He picked up on the 4th. I know why you're calling, said the voice. Morgana looked out through the sealed window at the car in the lot below, at the shape behind the windshield, at the city beyond that, indifferent and vast, going about its business at 8:20 in the morning without any awareness of what was being arranged inside this building and what had already been set in motion 14 hours ago. "Tell me it's not true," she said. A very long silence. "I can't tell you that," the voice said, and Morgana closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The kind of closing that isn't exhaustion and isn't grief exactly, but is the specific, private acknowledgement of a reality you had hoped to be wrong about, offered to no one because there was no one in this corner of the room to offer it to. Then she opened them. "Then we need to talk," she said, "and not on this line." She ended the call. She turned back to face the room. Harlan was watching her from across it, had not stopped watching her, with an expression that had moved well past professional interest into something she couldn't fully categorize and did not have time to try. Mamit was watching her too, from the bed, with the expression of a man who had given her the minimum information necessary and was now watching to see whether she would do what he believed she was capable of doing. She walked back across the room. She stopped in front of Harlan. She looked at him with the eyes that gave nothing away, and then with the careful deliberateness of someone opening a door they have been standing in front of for some time, she gave him something. "The name he gave me," she said quietly, "I know it, and if it's accurate, if the person he named is actually the source of the leak, then the asset Mammoth was carrying is not the only thing in motion right now." She held his gaze. "Everything you think you know about this operation, about what Mammoth was transporting and why and for whom, you need to be willing to rebuild it from the ground up in the next few hours." Harlan looked at her, a long, measured look, the kind that was making a decision. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that we've been working from a compromised picture this entire time?" "I'm telling you," Morgana said, "that someone inside your network knew enough to leak Mammoth's route, his cargo, and his destination. And that person gave that information to people who are now ahead of us by 14 hours. She paused. "And I'm telling you that I know who it is, and that you are not going to like it." The recovery room held still around them. Mamit, from his bed, said one thing in Kabardian, short, quiet. Morgana didn't translate it for Harlan. She didn't need to. It was the same thing she was already thinking, had been thinking since the man in civilian clothes said the name. The mission was no longer about protecting what Mamit had been carrying. It was about finding out who had decided it was acceptable to put him in the ground to get it. Orchestrated cinematic screenplay part with dramatic pacing and psychological depth. The name Morgana had refused to say out loud in the recovery room was eating at Harlan like a splinter he couldn't locate. He knew she wasn't going to give it to him there, not with the nurse still pressed against the wall and the resident still crouched behind the medication cart, and a detained man standing with his hands against the window glass, and Mammoth watching all of it from his bed, with the patience of someone who had learned to conserve energy for the moments that mattered. Harlan understood operational security. He understood the architecture of need to know, but understanding the architecture didn't make the waiting easier. And by the time Reese arrived to take custody of the detained man, and the facility's internal security team had been called, and the recovery ward had been cleared of everyone who didn't have a direct functional reason to be in it, Harlan had approximately 14 questions and the bone-deep certainty that the answers were going to restructure everything he thought he was working with. Morgana had asked for 10 minutes. She used 8. She came back to where he was standing in the corridor outside the recovery ward with the same composed, unreadable face she always wore, and she said, "Is there somewhere in this building that isn't monitored?" Harlan looked at her. "Define monitored." "Security cameras, audio pickup, any recording system connected to the facility's main network." He thought for a moment. "There's a maintenance corridor off the sub-basement. The cameras down there have been on a maintenance ticket for 6 weeks. Reese checked it when we arrived." "Of course he did," she said without irony. They took the stairs. The maintenance corridor was exactly what it sounded like. Utilitarian, functional, the kind of space that existed to support the building's systems rather than its people. They stood in it, and the sounds of the facility above them were muffled and distant, and the absence of cameras felt, paradoxically, louder than their presence would have. Harlan crossed his arms, waited. Morgana looked at the floor for a moment, not in defeat, in the way of someone selecting the right entry point into a complicated structure, the way you study a lock before you pick it. "The name the messenger gave me," she said. "His name is Callum Voss." Harlan's expression didn't break, but something behind it did. A very small, very deep fracture, the kind that starts before the surface shows it. "Voss," he said. "You know him." "I know of him." His voice was carefully flat. "He's a senior analyst, Joint Intelligence Coordination. He's been embedded with the task force I'm attached to for 14 months. "He's been passing information for longer than that," Morgana said. 11 months, based on what I was given. The leak on Mamet's route was not his first. It was his most recent. Harlan uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. The small, controlled fidget of a man managing a very large response in a very small container. "That's not a thing you say without evidence." "I know. If you're wrong about this, I know what happens if I'm wrong." She held his gaze. "I'm not wrong." "How do you know?" "Because the organization I work for has been tracking the leak for 4 months. We narrowed it to someone with specific access to joint coordination intelligence. Mamet's handler communication, his route, his cargo manifest. The field of candidates was 9 people. Over the last 6 weeks, it narrowed to 2. And the name the messenger delivered to me this morning confirmed which of the 2 it is." She paused. "Voss." Harlan was quiet for a long time, long enough that the ventilation system in the sub-basement cycled through one full rotation, and the distant sound of the facility above them shifted and settled. "Who sent the messenger?" he said finally. "Someone trying to protect the asset." "The asset Mamet was carrying?" "Yes, which has already been in motion for 14 hours. "Yes." He looked at her. "And you know where it's going?" Morgana held his gaze steadily. "I know where it was supposed to go. Mamet was transporting it to a handoff point. He was 20 miles from the handoff when they hit him." She paused. "If Voss gave them Mamet's route, he almost certainly gave them the handoff location too, which means the people waiting at the other end of that chain are either already compromised or already gone." Harlan rubbed the back of his neck, one slow, deliberate motion. "This is not a small problem." "No," Morgana said, "it is not a small problem. I need to call this up the chain." "If you call it up the chain through standard task force channels," she said carefully, "you are calling it through the same network that Voss has access to." Harlan stopped. The hand on the back of his neck went still. And then, with the particular deliberateness of a man realizing that the floor he thought was solid has been built over something that isn't, he lowered his arm and looked at her with new eyes. "You're telling me I can't use my own chain of command. I'm telling you that using it through standard channels gives Voss 14 minutes of warning minimum, based on his access level and how task force communications route." She paused. "What do you think he does with 14 minutes? The corridor was very quiet. "He runs," Harlan said. "He runs," Morgana confirmed. "And everything that could connect him to 11 months of leaks, and to whatever happened to Mamet on that road, runs with him." Harlan was already thinking. She could see it, not on his face, which remained as controlled as ever, but in the quality of his stillness, which had shifted from the stillness of listening to the stillness of active calculation. The kind of thinking that happened when the rules of a problem had changed mid-solution, and the mind was rapidly rebuilding the architecture from available materials. "You have a separate channel," he said, not a question. "I have several. And you're willing to use them here? With me?" She looked at him. "I'm standing in a sub-basement with you, having just told you the name of a mole in your task force. I think the question of willingness has been addressed. Harlan almost smiled. It made it to his face this time, briefly. Fair point. He straightened. What do you need from me? I need Voss kept in the dark for the next 6 hours. I need Mammoth moved, not officially, not through facility channels, quietly, to a location that Voss doesn't have clearance to access. And I need your personal read on who in your task force is clean, not the file, your gut, the people you would trust your life to without a second thought. That's a short list, he said. Short is exactly the right length. He gave her 3 names. She noted them, not on paper, not on a phone, in the precise internal filing system that she had developed over years of operating in environments where the only secure storage was the one inside her skull. Then she gave him something in return. She reached into the inside pocket of her scrubs jacket, the pocket that wasn't standard issue, that had been added by someone who understood that people in her line of work needed a pocket that wasn't standard issue. And she produced a small object, a drive, the size of a thumbnail. She held it out to him. He looked at it. What's on it? 11 months of metadata, communication patterns, timing correlations, access logs cross-referenced against leak events. It doesn't have Voss's name on it directly. It has something better. It has a pattern that is specific enough to one individual that any analyst worth their clearance will reach the same conclusion without being told what conclusion to reach. She paused. It's the kind of evidence that holds in a proceeding, not just the kind that gets someone detained and then released because the chain of custody is arguable. Harlan took the drive. He held it for a moment, looking at it with the expression of a man holding something small that contains something very large. How long have you been building this? 4 months. And you were going to, what? Give this to your organization at the secondary location tonight? That was the plan. And now? She looked at him. Now the plan has accelerated. Because the messenger this morning means someone on the other side is also moving, which means the window before Voss realizes the net is closing is shorter than I calculated. Harlan closed his hand around the drive. I'll need to verify this independently before I move on it. I'm not going to take action against a task force member on the word of someone I met 30 hours ago. I would think less of you if you did, she said simply. Verify it. I'll give you 4 hours. After that, whether you're ready or not, this moves. He looked at her with the gray-green eyes that had been reading people in high-stakes rooms for years. You're not asking my permission. No. But you're giving me the 4 hours. Because you're going to need them. And because Mammoth trusted you enough to tell you the word. That matters to me. She turned toward the stairwell. 4 hours, Harlan. He watched her go. Then he looked at the drive in his hand. Then he took out the phone that wasn't connected to the task force network and made a call that had nothing to do with standard channels, to one of the 3 names he had given her, and said, I need you to look at something, quietly, right now. Do not route this through the coordination server. Upstairs, the facility moved through its morning with no awareness of what was happening in its sub-basement or its recovery ward or the particular accumulation of pressure that was building in its east corridor, like a weather system about to make its direction known. Carver found Morgana at 11:40. She was at the nurse's station, which was where she had returned to after coming back from the sub-basement, because where else would she be? She was a nurse. She was on shift. Patients did not stop requiring care because the operational world had accelerated. He came to the station with a folder and set it down in front of her. She looked at it. It was her personnel file. She looked at him. I pulled it this morning, he said. His voice had a different quality than it had carried yesterday. Not softer, Carver didn't do soft, but more considered. The voice of a man who has been thinking about something carefully. After our conversation, after yesterday, he tapped the folder. There are things in here that don't add up. You know that. I assume you're aware that I know that. Morgana said. I'm not asking you to explain them. He held her gaze. I want to be clear about that. Whatever is in the gaps, I'm not asking. I have been doing this long enough to understand that some gaps exist for reasons that are above my clearance and are not mine to ask about. He paused. What I am asking is whether this facility is safe, whether the people in it are safe. Morgana looked at him for a moment. The man who had grabbed her wrist and called her furniture 30 hours ago was now standing across from her with a folder and a question that was entirely genuine and entirely human, and she gave it the weight it deserved. I'm working to make sure it stays that way, she said. There are people in and around this facility who should not be here. I'm working to address that. With Harlan. With resources available to me. He nodded once, slowly. What do you need from me? Business as usual. Nothing unusual on your end. If anyone asks about Mamit, about his status, his location, anything connected to him, you tell them he's stable and that there are no visitors permitted per his attending physician's orders. Me. I'm his attending physician of record as of this morning. She paused. I updated the file. Carver blinked. You updated? I have the credentials. I have the clinical standing. And you are going to be asked questions today that you don't want to answer. She held his gaze. This way, the questions come to me. He looked at her for a long moment. You've done this before. I've done variations of this before, she said. He picked up the folder. He tucked it under his arm. He looked like a man who had reorganized his understanding of his own ER and was finding the new configurations simultaneously more unsettling and more interesting than the old one. The coffee in the break room is fresh, he said. If you haven't eaten, there's still food from the morning cart. He walked away. Morgana watched him go. Then she turned back to her screen and kept working, because the work didn't stop and the cover required that the work never stop. Reese found her at 12:15. He appeared at her shoulder without preamble, Reese's standard mode of arrival, and said, low and direct, "The man from the recovery room, the messenger. He gave us a phone number before we transferred him. He said it was a number you would want to call." She didn't look up from the chart. Did he say anything else? He said the car in the lot is gone. The driver left at 11:07, and he said, Reese paused in the specific way of someone relaying information they found difficult to categorize. He said to tell you the secondary location has been compromised. Morgana's hand stopped moving over the keyboard. 1 full second of absolute stillness. Which secondary location? She said. He said you'd know. He said there's only one that matters right now. The secondary location. The meeting she had been told to attend at 1800. The place the voice on the phone had directed her to because the primary was too exposed. And now the secondary was burned, which meant the voice had been operating from information that had a leak in it, which meant... She put the chart down, carefully, parallel to the edge of the counter, the way she always put things down. An anchor. A small, deliberate act of control in a moment when control required deliberate acts. The phone number, she said. Did you run it? Prepaid, registered to nothing. Reese set a piece of paper on the counter. Actual paper, handwritten, the kind of communication that left no digital trail. But Harlan wants you to know that he finished his verification, 4 hours ahead of schedule. She looked at the paper, at the number written on it, at Reese's face, which was giving her the closest thing to an expression of professional respect she had seen from him in 30 hours. He's ready to move, she said. He's ready when you are. Reese straightened. He also said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, that the canaries were placed well. Something passed through Morgana's face, very brief, not quite a smile, the precursor to one, the shape that a smile leaves in an expression, even when it doesn't fully arrive. She took the piece of paper, folded it once, put it in the non-standard pocket. She moved. The call she needed to make couldn't come from her registered phone or the facility's communication system or anything that routed through a network Voss had access to. She made it from a device she took from the non-standard pocket, not the piece of paper, something else, something that had been there the whole time in the way the things that matter are often present long before you need them. And she dialed the number from the paper and stood in the east stairwell and waited. It rang once. "I was wondering if you'd call before the window closed," said a voice she had not heard before. Female, youngish, clipped with the particular efficiency of someone who worked in a field where conversations were kept short on principle. "Who are you?" Morgana said. "Someone your contact sent when he realized the secondary was burned. He couldn't call you directly. He said you'd know why." Morgana understood immediately. If the secondary was burned, his line was burned too. He'd been careful enough to have someone standing by with a clean device and an isolated number. That was the kind of preparation that either meant he'd anticipated this possibility or he'd known it was coming. She needed to determine which one. "Verify yourself," Morgana said. The voice gave 3 pieces of information in sequence. All 3 were correct. All 3 were things that could only have come from the voice on the phone, from the man who had built her cover and sent her here and directed her to a secondary location that no longer existed. "All right," Morgana said. "He needs you to know that Voss became aware of the messenger's detention at approximately 11:30 this morning." The voice was clean and factual, no extra material. "He is calculating that Voss will move within the next 2 to 3 hours. Not run, not yet. Move the asset first. He can't run if the asset is still traceable to him. He'll try to redirect it before he exits." "Where will he redirect it?" "That's what he needs you to determine. You're closer to Voss's network than we are right now. You have Harlan. Harlan has access to the task force's operational logs." A pause. "He said you'd know what to ask for." "Tell him I'm working it," Morgana said. "There's one more thing." The voice shifted slightly, not softer, more careful. "He wants you to know that he's sorry about the secondary. He said you'd know what that means in full." Morgana was quiet for a moment, in the stairwell with the sound of the building around her, and the phone in her hand, and the weight of what she was sorry about settling into the space between her ribs. "I know what it means," she said. She ended the call and went back up the stairs. Harlan was in the east corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his phone in his hand, and the expression of someone who has been doing the kind of thinking that produces results and is now waiting for the next piece. He saw her coming and straightened. "Voss knows," she said without preamble. "He's going to move the asset before he runs, 2 to 3 hours. Harlan's eyes sharpened. "The task force operational logs for the last 48 hours. There's a route management file, updated twice daily. If Voss has been redirecting the asset, it'll show a discrepancy between the scheduled and actual position data. But I can't pull it through standard access without him seeing the pull." "One of your 3 names," Morgana said. "Someone with log access who can pull it clean." He was already dialing. He turned slightly away, spoke for 40 seconds, and turned back. 6 minutes. They stood in the corridor. 6 minutes in operational time is not 6 minutes in any other kind of time. It is longer and more loaded, and it requires a specific kind of patience that is not passive. It is the patience of continuous active readiness, of a body and mind held at the edge of motion without tipping over into it. Harlan's phone buzzed at 4 minutes and 50 seconds. He read the screen, read it again, and Morgana watched his face do something she had not seen it do in 30 hours of watching it. Something that wasn't controlled. Something that arrived before the training could intercept it. "He didn't redirect it," Harlan said. His voice had a different quality, stripped of some outer layer that she had come to understand was always there. "The log shows the asset's position pinging at a location 20 minutes from this facility." He looked up. "It's been there for 11 hours. "It never left," Morgana said. "It never left." He lowered the phone. "The messenger told you it had been in motion for 14 hours. That was a test. Voss planted that information to see who would act on it and how." His jaw tightened. "We were being watched to see if the net was closing." "And now Voss knows the net is closing," Morgana said. because the messenger is detained, which means he's not redirecting the asset, Harlan said. He's going to destroy it. The words hit the corridor and stayed there. Everything that Mammoth had nearly died to protect. 11 months of a leak that had cost lives and operations, and the kind of damage that took years to calculate fully. The thing that the voice on Morgana's phone had sent her here to stand in place for. To be present and invisible and ready when the moment arrived. The moment that had arrived not gradually but all at once. The way moments like this always arrived, faster than the preparation and heavier than the anticipation. Morgana looked at Harlan. "We have to go right now," she said. "I need authorization to—" Harlan. Her voice was flat and certain, and entirely without the composed neutrality she normally used as insulation. Just the voice, direct. "If you wait for authorization through any channel Voss has access to, the asset is gone, and the evidence with it, and Mammoth was hit on that road for nothing." She held his gaze. "I know what I'm asking you to do. I know what it costs you to do it outside the chain, and I'm asking anyway." He looked at her for a full 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which 30 hours of building something neither of them had named were visible in the space between them. Then he pushed off the wall and said, "Reese is in the west lot. He has a vehicle." They moved. Morgana stopped at the nurse's station for exactly 8 seconds, long enough to pick up her jacket, long enough to say to Hendricks without explanation, "If Dr. Carver asks, I'm on a personal call. I'll be back within the hour." Hendricks looked at her, at the jacket, at the particular quality of her movement. "Are you okay?" she said. Morgana paused for a fraction of a second that she hadn't budgeted for. Because Hendricks was asking genuinely, not procedurally, not professionally. Just one human being looking at another and asking the most fundamental available question. "I'm working on it," Morgana said, and she went through the door. In the recovery ward, Mammoth lay in his bed and looked at the sealed window and the sky beyond it, and the city going about its indifferent business, and he said, in Kabardian, to the empty room, the thing he had said to Morgana the previous day, in the moments before she walked out. The thing she hadn't translated for Harlan because it wasn't meant for Harlan. It was meant for her. A reminder. Something old. Something that the people who trained them both had told them when they were very young and the world was very large and the stakes were abstract rather than concrete and bleeding in a hospital bed. He said, "The work is never finished. Only the person changes." Then he closed his eyes and rested because there was nothing else he could do from where he was. And somewhere outside this building, the woman who had pulled him back from the edge of a 14-hour silence was moving toward the next thing, and the best he could offer her now was to stay alive long enough for it to matter. The vehicle pulled out of the west lot at 12:41, Harlan in front, Reese driving, Morgana in the back with a small drive still in her pocket, and the number from the piece of paper memorized and filed alongside the 17 other numbers that existed nowhere but inside her. The city moved past the windows. The sky was flat and gray and entirely indifferent. 20 minutes away, something that one man had nearly died protecting was sitting in a location that a man who had spent 11 months selling his own people was about to reduce to nothing. Morgana looked out the window and felt the specific internal temperature of a decision that had been building for 3 weeks, for 6 years, finally reaching the point where it had to be a thing in the world rather than a thing inside her. The invisible woman was done being invisible. The 20-minute drive felt like something compressed, like time itself had been folded at the edges and the middle pulled tight. Nobody in the vehicle spoke for the first 6 minutes, and the silence had the specific quality of 3 people running parallel calculations and not yet ready to share the results. Reese drove the way he did everything, economically, without wasted motion, with the contained focus of someone who understood that his job in this moment was to get them there, and that every variable outside of that was someone else's problem. Harlan sat in the front with the drive in his jacket pocket and his phone face down on his knee, And Morgana sat in the back and watched the city move past and thought about Voss. She had never met him. She knew his file the way she knew most things, thoroughly, structurally, with the kind of understanding that comes from reading a person through their pattern of choices rather than their physical presence. Voss was 51, 17 years in intelligence coordination, 2 commendations, 1 formal reprimand for insubordination that had been quietly buried, 1 divorce, no children. A man who had given enough of himself to a system that he had eventually arrived at the particular bitter calculation of someone who decided the system owed him more than it was paying. That calculation was the most dangerous one in their world, more dangerous than ideology, more dangerous than blackmail, more dangerous than almost any other motive. Because the man who felt owed was the man who had already done the moral arithmetic and arrived at a conclusion he could live with. He wasn't going to feel remorse. He was going to feel justified right up until the moment he was stopped, which was why he had to be stopped before he had the chance to finish what he had started. Harlan turned in his seat and looked at her. The asset, what is it actually? Not the operational description. What is it? Morgana considered him. Why does it matter for the next 15 minutes? Because I'm going in without authorization to stop a man I've worked adjacent to for 14 months from destroying something I don't fully understand, and I'd like to know what I'm protecting. Fair, she conceded that internally. It's a documentation package, physical and encrypted digital. It contains the identities and operational histories of 11 assets currently embedded in 3 separate, hostile networks across 2 continents. If Voss destroys it, those identities have no backup verification. If the hostile networks have already been given partial information, which is likely given 11 months of leaks, those 11 people have no way to establish clean cover. They burn. All of them. Some of them die. Harlan was quiet for a moment, and Mamet was transporting it because the secure digital channels for this kind of material were compromised 8 months ago. Someone with access to the encryption protocols sold the keys. The only way to move this package safely was physically, through a courier with no digital footprint on the specific route. She paused. Mamet has moved things like this before. He was chosen because he was trusted. He almost died because someone trusted was looking. Harlan turned back to face forward. His hands were on his knees. She watched the muscles in his jaw work once, a single, brief contraction, and then go still. 11 people, he said. 11. Reese said from the driver's seat without inflection. Location is 2 minutes out. The warehouse district on the eastern edge of the city was not the kind of place that attracted attention, which was precisely the kind of place that people in their line of work used for the things that required not attracting attention. The specific location, a mid-sized storage facility, legitimately registered to a logistics company that was 3 degrees removed from a government holding entity, had been pinged by the operational log Harlan's contact had pulled. Asset last confirmed position. 11 hours of sitting still. Reese pulled the vehicle to a stop 1.5 blocks away, in the shadow of a building that provided cover from the direct sightline of the facility entrance. 1 vehicle in the front lot, Reese said. He had eyes on it from this distance, in the way these men always had eyes on things. I don't recognize it from task force motor pool. Voss wouldn't use a task force vehicle, Harlan said. He'd go personal. Or rental. He looked at Morgana. If he's already inside, then we're on his timeline, not ours, she said, which means we move now. Harlan looked at Reese. Reese looked at Harlan. The exchange lasted approximately 1 second and contained a full conversation conducted entirely in the shorthand of 2 people who had operated together long enough that words were a redundancy. Reese reached under his seat. He produced a service weapon and checked it with the automatic economy of someone for whom that action was as reflexive as breathing. He held a second one across the console toward Harlan without looking. Harlan took it. He looked at Morgana. she met his gaze. "I don't need one," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not skepticism, more like the adjustment you make when someone has told you something that reframes what you thought you understood. "All right," he said. They got out of the vehicle. The entrance to the facility was unlocked. Not forced, unlocked, which was its own kind of information. Voss had a key or a code, or someone who had given him either. And the ease of it, the absence of any forced entry, told Morgana that this place had been prepared in advance. That the 11 hours of the asset sitting in this location was not an accident of transport. It had been placed here, left here. The asset had been intercepted not on the road with Mamet, but at the handoff point. The handoff had been burned, and the package had been redirected here, and Mamet had been hit to slow down anyone who might connect the dots before Voss was ready to close the loop. She said this to Harlan in 7 words as they moved through the entrance, and he absorbed it in 2 seconds and nodded once. The picture had just sharpened, and the sharpening made it worse. The interior of the facility was a series of storage units, large and identical, arranged along corridors that ran perpendicular to the main entrance. The kind of space where sound moved differently, absorbed by the contents of the units, softened, redirected. Reese moved left without being directed to. Harlan moved right. Morgana went straight and followed the specific quality of wrongness that she had learned, over years, to treat as navigational data rather than intuition. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps. He was careful about his footsteps. But the specific sound of a device being powered up, a very small electronic tone, the kind that a destruction unit makes when it initiates its cycle. She had heard that sound once before in her life, under completely different circumstances, and her body remembered it before her mind had finished processing it. She moved faster. Unit 17. The door was partially open, and the light inside was the flat, functional light of a space being used for work, rather than comfort. And Callum Voss was standing in the center of it, with a device in his hand and a hard case open on the floor beside him, and the particular focused expression of a man who has made his decision and is executing it and has already emotionally vacated the consequences. He looked up when she came through the door. For 1 full second, neither of them moved. He was older than his file photo, grayer, the kind of gray that comes from specific things rather than age generally. His eyes were the eyes she had reconstructed from pattern analysis. Intelligent, tired in a deep way, carrying the specific weight of someone who has been justifying something to themselves for long enough that the justification has become structural. "You're the nurse," he said. "I'm Shepard," she said. Something moved in his face at the word. Not surprise, recognition. The recognition of someone who had known this moment was possible and had been running the calculation of its probability for some time. "The drive is already initiated," he said. "You're 40 seconds too late." "The physical package," she said. "Where is it?" He looked at the hard case on the floor. She looked at it. The device in his hand was connected to something inside it, a digital destruction unit running its cycle. 40 seconds, maybe less now. "Even if you stop the digital destruction," he said, "the physical documents are..." "Where are they, Voss?" He looked at her with the eyes of a tired man making one final calculation. "Why does it matter now? You have the metadata drive. Harlan has it. That's enough to burn me without the package." He tilted his head slightly. "Or is it not enough? Is that why you're here? Because the drive proves the pattern but not the content? Because without the content you have circumstantial and not direct?" He was right. He had done the math. The metadata drive showed the correlation, showed someone with his specific access profile had leaked at 11 specific junctures. But correlation in a proceeding required corroboration. The physical package, if it contained what she believed it contained communication records, verification codes, material that would close the gap between pattern and proof. 30 seconds, he said. He wasn't gloating. He said it with the resignation of a man watching a clock and reporting what it said. "I know why you did it," Morgana said. He blinked. It was involuntary. The single blink of a person who has been prepared for confrontation and has not been prepared for understanding, and the difference between those two things destabilized him by approximately 3 degrees. Not enough, but something. "You were passed over for the Cyprus operation," she said. "After you built the asset network that made the Cyprus operation possible, someone above you took the credit, took the promotion, and left you in coordination with the same access level and none of the recognition." She kept her voice entirely level, not sympathetic, not prosecutorial, just accurate. "And then you were passed over again for the Ankara Review Board. Someone else. Again." She held his gaze. "And you decided that if the system wasn't going to pay you what you were owed, you were going to collect a different way." The device in his hand was still running. She could hear it, a very faint processing sound, the sound of data being overwritten at the sector level. "You don't know anything about what I'm owed," he said. His voice had changed. The resignation was still there, but something under it had shifted, a heat that he hadn't wanted to show. 17 years. 17 years of building the architecture that other people put their names on. Assets I recruited, networks I designed, operations I structured from the ground up that got named for the men who signed off on them at the top. The heat was climbing. He hadn't meant to let it climb, and he was watching himself let it happen and not stopping it. "So yes, I made a decision. I made a business decision, because this was never anything else to them. It was always a transaction. I just finally participated in the transaction instead of funding it for free." "And the 11 people whose identities are in that package," Morgana said. "What transaction did they participate in?" The heat in his expression encountered something and stopped. Not guilt. It wasn't guilt. Guilt would have been easier. It was the specific look of a man who has encountered the human cost of his arithmetic and has spent 11 months not looking directly at it and is now being made to look. 20 seconds, she said. She stepped forward. "Give me the device." He looked at her. The device in his hand, the case on the floor, the door behind her where Harlan would come through in the next 30 seconds with a weapon and the full weight of what happened to people who did what Voss had done. He looked at her. "The physical package is in the case," he said. "Under the lining, it's not initiated." He held out the device. "The digital destruction is not reversible, but the physical..." She took the device from his hand. She crossed to the case and dropped to one knee and found the false bottom in 4 seconds flat. Because she had seen this case design before, had used this case design before, and pulled the physical package from beneath the lining. A sealed folio, heavy for its size, intact. She stood with it. Harlan came through the door with his weapon up and took in the room in the way he took in rooms, completely, instantly, with the total inventory of someone whose survival had required it. Voss, with his hands at his sides, Morgana with the folio and the initiated destruction device, the hard case open on the floor. "It's done," Morgana said. Harlan looked at Voss, then at her, then at the folio in her hands with something that wasn't entirely operational, something more personal, more weighted, the look of a man confronting the full scale of what had been at stake. Reese came through the door behind him. He assessed. He moved to Voss without being directed, and Voss offered no resistance because the calculation had reached its final line, and the answer was what it was. Harlan holstered his weapon. He stood in the middle of the unit and looked at Morgana. She looked back at him. Between them was 32 hours of a story that had started with a man on a gurney and 12 failed interpreters and a rookie nurse who had made herself invisible and had arrived here, in a storage unit on the east side of a city that didn't know any of this was happening, with a folio in her hands and 11 lives still intact because of the specific accumulation of everything she was. The digital package is gone, she said. The backup encryption keys were on the drive that Voss initiated. That's a loss. She paused. But the physical identities are here. The assets can be moved, repapered, and re-embedded before the hostile networks act on whatever partial information Voss already gave them. There's a window. It's narrow, but it exists. How narrow? 72 hours, possibly less. Who coordinates it? She held his gaze. My organization. Your task force supplies the logistical support and the clean channels. But it has to run through people whose names I vet personally before any communication goes out. She paused. And it runs through you, on your authority, not through standard chain of command until after the assets are clear. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. You're asking me to run a joint operation with an organization that doesn't have a public-facing name, through unofficial channels, on my personal authority, without telling my superiors until it's done. Yes, she said, and if it goes wrong, you are acting on credible intelligence obtained through legitimate means and making the best operational decision available under time constraint. She tilted her head slightly, which is also true. And if it goes right, she considered, 11 people go home. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with the making of it. Reese walked Voss out of the unit, and the sound of their footsteps receded down the corridor, and the storage unit was quiet, and the folio was in Morgana's hands, and the initiated device was on the floor with its cycle complete, and its damage done, and its irreversibility absolute. The drive, she said. I need to make a call. Your contact who pulled the log. I need them on a clean line in the next 30 minutes. We start moving the assets tonight. I'll arrange it. He pulled out his phone, stopped, looked at her. Morgana. She looked at him. Shepard, he said, not testing it this time, not the controlled detonation of someone checking for a reaction, just a word being used because it was the correct word. Is that what I call you now? Something moved in her face, the thing that had almost been a smile in the East Corridor when Reese had told her the canaries were placed well. It arrived this time. Small, real. The kind of expression that gets past the defenses, not because the defenses have lowered, but because what produced it was strong enough to come through anyway. Morgana works, she said. It's my real name. He absorbed that, the deliberate weight of it, that in a conversation full of constructed identities and operational designations and carefully managed reveals, she had just given him the one thing that wasn't any of those things. All right, he said. He almost smiled back. Morgana. They walked out of the unit together and down the corridor and through the entrance and into the flat gray afternoon. And Reese had Voss secured in the vehicle, and the city was still going about its business with total indifference to everything that had just been preserved inside it. She called the number from the piece of paper on the way back to the facility. The young female voice answered on the second ring. Package is intact, Morgana said. Physical only. Digital is lost. I need the 72-hour window initiated as soon as I'm back at the facility. Coordinate with Harlan directly. I'll send you his clean line. Understood. A pause. He's going to want to talk to you. I know. He was worried. Morgana looked out the window at the city, at the specific quality of midday light on ordinary streets where ordinary things were happening and would continue to happen regardless of what 11 people had just been pulled back from the edge of. Tell him I know, she said. Tell him I'll call from the secondary location. The secondary is burned. The second secondary, she said. He would know which one. There was always another level of preparation beneath the one that burned. He had taught her that. The line was quiet for a moment. Then the voice said, with a warmth that was slightly unprofessional and entirely human, Good work, Shepard. Morgana ended the call and held the phone in her lap. Harlan glanced back at her from the front seat. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with those gray-green eyes that had been reading rooms and people in situations for years. And in them she saw the things she had not let herself look for since arriving at the facility 3 weeks ago. Not recognition, not suspicion, not the professional assessment of someone cataloging her capabilities against a threat matrix. Respect. Clean and direct and without qualification. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back out the window. By the time they reached the facility, it was 1400. 2 hours and 22 minutes since they had left. The ER was in its mid-afternoon rhythm, not the controlled chaos of the morning, not the focused tension of an acute event, but the sustained, functional hum of a place doing the ordinary work of keeping people alive, which was never ordinary to the people doing it. Morgana walked back through the doors. She signed in. She hung up her jacket. She pulled on her scrubs. Hendricks was at the nurse's station, and she looked up when Morgana came in, and her face moved through several things in quick succession. Relief, curiosity, the particular expression of someone who has been holding a question and is deciding whether to ask it. She didn't ask it. Bay 3 has been waiting for a chart update for 40 minutes, she said instead. I'll get it, Morgana said. She picked up the chart and moved toward Bay 3, and the work resumed around her, seamless and continuous, the way it always had, the way she had always allowed it to. And the folio was now in Harlan's custody, and the asset names were intact, and 72 hours had begun their count, and Voss was in a vehicle, heading toward a facility where the weight of 11 months was going to land on him, with the full authority of every system he had betrayed. At 1500, Carver stopped next to her at the medication station. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking. Then, without looking at her, in a voice that was lower than his usual register, "Everything resolved?" She thought about 11 people who didn't know that today had been the day their lives balanced on a decision made in a storage unit by a woman they had never met and would never know had made it. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He picked up his chart. He started to walk away, stopped, turned back. "You know," he said with the careful tone of a man choosing words for something he hadn't planned to say out loud. "I spent 22 years in this facility believing I could read people, read their capability, their purpose, their value." He paused. "I was wrong about you from the first day, in every direction." Morgana looked at him. "Most people are more than their file says. I'm beginning to understand that." He looked at her with the expression of a man revising a fundamental principle. "I won't make that mistake again." He walked away. At 1645, a message came through to Harlan's clean line. He forwarded it to Morgana with 3 words attached. First one, clear. The first of the 11 assets had been reached, warned, and was moving. 72 hours minus 2, 10 more to go. She stood at the nurse's station and read the message and felt something release in her chest. Not the full release. That would come when all 11 were clear, and that might be days from now. And there were still variables and still risks, and still the particular sustained tension of an operation that wasn't finished until it was finished. But the first one, moving. Mamet was transferred at 1700 to a secure location that Voss had no clearance to access. Before he left, Morgana sat with him for 4 minutes. She told him the package was intact. She told him the assets were being moved. She told him the name she had been given was correct and that the matter was in hand. He listened to all of it in Kabardian with the stillness of a man hearing things he had needed to hear. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You didn't need to come and tell me." "No," she agreed, "but you did." "You almost died for this," she said. "You deserve to know that it held." He looked at her with those present, calculating eyes that had found her in a trauma bay 32 hours ago, across a room full of people who couldn't reach him, and he said, very simply, "Thank you, Morgana." She nodded once. She stood. She straightened the badge on her chest, the small automatic anchor. She moved toward the door. "Shepard," he said behind her. She paused. "The work is never finished," he said in Kabardian. "Only the person changes." She had said those words in a sub-basement the night she met the voice on the phone for the first time. She had said them years before that, in a room she couldn't name, in a city she couldn't reference, to someone who had been teaching her what she was. They were words that had been passed down through the people in her world, the way certain tools were passed down, because they remained useful, because they remained true. "I know," she said, and she walked out. Harlan was in the east corridor. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his jacket on, and the particular quality of someone who is done for the day and knows it and is allowing themselves that knowledge. He had a small object in his hand. He held it out to her when she stopped in front of him. It was a pin, military insignia, worn, not new, not ceremonial, but the real kind, the kind that had been somewhere and done something and carried the evidence of it in its patina. She looked at it in his palm without taking it. "Where did you get this?" she said. "It belonged to someone who worked the way you work," he said, "who was placed before events, who communicated across barriers, who was invisible until the moment that invisibility had to end." He held her gaze. "She was gone before I got to this work, but I was told by someone who knew her that if I ever met the person this pin was waiting for, I'd know." Morgana looked at the pin. Something moved through her that she didn't try to name and didn't try to stop. It moved through and she let it go. "And do you?" she said. "No?" "Yeah," Harlan said. "I know." She reached out and took the pin. She held it for a moment, the weight of it, the realness of it, the small and total solidity of a thing that meant what it meant without requiring explanation. Then she looked at him. "The 72-hour window," she said. "I'm going to need access to your clean channels for the duration. And when this is over, when all 11 are clear and the operation is closed, I have a conversation to have with your task force leadership about how this gap happened and how to close it. That conversation is going to be uncomfortable," he said. "Most important ones are." He uncrossed his arms, straightened up from the wall. "I'll set up the access tonight." He looked at her for a moment longer than the operational exchange required. "And after? When the window closes and the conversation happens, and it's done." She looked at him steadily. "That depends on what the next thing is. There's always a next thing." "Yes," she said, "there is." She closed her hand around the pin. She looked down the east corridor, the quiet corridor, the corridor that had held more of the real work of the last 32 hours than any other space in this building, and she felt the particular sensation of a threshold being crossed. Not dramatically, not with ceremony or announcement, the way thresholds are actually crossed. One step, continuous with the step before it, different only in where it lands. She had come to this facility to be invisible. She had done what invisible people do. She had been present before the event, patient through the preparation, ready at the moment of arrival. She had saved a life that 12 others couldn't reach. She had protected 11 more that no one in this building would ever know about. She had done it without recognition, without authority, without anything that would appear on the official record of this day. The silent badge was in her hand. The work was never finished. And Morgana White, who was Shepherd, who was more than any file had ever said she was, put the pin in the pocket over her heart and went back to work.